iPhone 10 and Redmi Note 5 Pro both have primary 12 megapixel sensors, and that's about as far as the similarities go. The sensor on the iPhone 10 has f1.8 aperture, while the 5 Pro has f2.2 aperture and 1.25 micron pixel size. The secondary sensor on the iPhone 10 is a telephoto lens that has 2x optical zoom as well as a smaller f2.4 aperture. The 5 Pro gets a 5 megapixel depth sensor with f2 aperture and 1.12 micron pixel size. The iPhone 10 has OIS on both, while the 5 Pro doesn't have OIS at all. Let's talk about image quality first. The iPhone goes for warmer color tones and has a more yellowish image, while the 5 Pro has cooler tones and a more bluish hue. The images turn out to be sharper and more detailed on the 5 Pro, and they also are larger in file size despite the same 12 megapixels of resolution. However, the real difference occurs under low light when the iPhone 10 with its brighter f1.8 aperture lens produces a cleaner image that's more correctly exposed and with lesser noise than the 5 Pro. In terms of dynamic range, iPhone 10 is more laid back while the Redmi Note 5 Pro is more aggressive. The advantage comes in the form of more information recovered from the shadows on the 5 Pro, but at times highlights are underexposed, such as this. The iPhone 10 has better exposure on the highlights, while the Note 5 Pro looks faded in the highlights. The 5 Pro also has a tendency to underexpose the images overall and might look darker due to the extra contrast applied while processing. You'll either need to manually correct the brightness before or after taking the photo. Now on to the main reason why we made this video, the portrait mode. The Redmi Note 5 Pro has a very different portrait mode algorithm that we have seen used only by the Pixel devices so far. It is linear and not just selective like the iPhones or the other phones. This means that the shallow depth of field achieved by it looks more like what you would get from a DSLR or any large sensor camera with a wide aperture. The iPhone on the other hand recognizes the object and applies a blur all around it to isolate it from the background. There's nothing wrong with this, but it isn't as natural as what Pixel phones give or even the Redmi Note 5 Pro. Hence why we wanted to make this video that compared the two. Since the focal lengths are quite different, it isn't possible to compare the field of view, and we've tried to minimize the differences in framing, but you might still notice some differences. I was pretty surprised to see that the iPhone 10 images do look poor in comparison. Firstly, almost every portrait shot on the iPhone 10 had a weird yellow tint to it due to wrong white balancing, which is quite unlike Apple. However, it happened. Secondly, if you zoom into the image, the details aren't as pronounced or as sharp as the Redmi Note 5 Pro is capable of achieving. In lower lighting conditions, the 5 Pro finds it difficult to get a sharp image, especially if the object is moving even slightly. However, if the light drops beyond a certain extent, then the iPhone 10 even fails to apply a portrait mode, while the 5 Pro still holds on for longer and applies a blur, albeit with more noise. In good lighting conditions, the portrait mode on the iPhone 10 has an inferior algorithm which often blurs out unnecessary portions and the edges aren't as refined as the 5 Pro. This is where the linear blurring of the 5 Pro shines. The iPhone 10 gets additional help with the narrower field of view on the telephoto lens, which gives a shallower depth of field by default, but the 5 Pro has edges that are sharper and better refined, and it doesn't make the same mistake as the iPhone by thinking that a brighter portion of the image is supposed to be blurred. We did a blind test of these two images where the phone A was on the left, that was the Note 5 Pro, and iPhone 10 was phone B on the right. This would perhaps give us a more appropriate and more honest answer if you guys feel that I'm being biased. There's some instances where the iPhone blurring might appeal to more people, but I found the ratio to be in favor of the 5 Pro. The front-facing cameras on both vary a lot in terms of the technical specifications. The iPhone 10 has a 7 megapixel camera while the 5 Pro gets a 20 megapixel Sony IMX376 sensor. The image processing is also very different. The iPhone 10 has a narrow field of view along with a high contrast image and sharper image, while the 5 Pro has a slightly softer and also flatter looking image. The algorithm on the front is again a similar story as the rear cameras for the portrait mode. The iPhone 10 tends to have a very lenient threshold that blurs more portions of your face and features than the 5 Pro. The 5 Pro is more precise, but both aren't perfect. There are some areas that both get wrong, but the 5 Pro is more refined and accurate. Coming to the videos, the 5 Pro and iPhone 10 both support EIS for their videos. The iPhone 10 goes all the way up to 4K 60fps, but the 5 Pro can currently do up to 1080p. We have shot both in 1080p mode and then upscaled it to 4K to match the final output resolution of this video. In terms of the video quality, there's a huge difference. iPhone has more pleasing colors and better detailing as well as a flatter profile. The 5 Pro seems a bit high on the contrast, has some white balance fluctuation issues in some demanding lighting conditions, and also has some artifacts at times, but the stabilization is nearly as good if not the same on both the phones. However, the audio quality is better on the 5 Pro. The story of the videos on the front camera are pretty similar too. The iPhone X has no EIS here and the videos are shaky. Despite the 5 Pro having an option to enable EIS here, it doesn't seem to help the video stabilize like it does with the rear camera. Perhaps an update will fix it. This is the front facing camera of the Redmi Note 5 Pro capturing video, stabilized video with EIS turned on. Let me know how it compares to the iPhone X video with the front facing camera, which you're going to be putting right after this, in terms of the overall stabilization, the contrast ratio, the sharpness, as well as the dynamic range. So it's really sunny out here right now and there's a lot of wind also, so we need to know how it handles my audio as well as the overall dynamic range, which is better. And let me know what you guys think about it. So this is the front facing camera of the iPhone X capturing video. Let me know how it is overall compared to the footage that you saw from the Redmi Note 5 Pro, both in terms of the sharpness, the stabilization, the audio quality, as well as the dynamic range, and the colors also, how it's actually rendering. So it's a bit windy here today, so perhaps you'll have some sort of issues with the audio, but even then we need to see how it tackles such situations. And even though it's quite bright, how the dynamic range also comes through across on video. The iPhone X records better videos with the rear cameras in higher resolution and better quality. It has better low light capabilities and it also has a telephoto camera for that extra reach. However, it gets blown away in terms of the portrait mode on the 5 Pro, which is really surprising but endearing, and to be honest, the difference in other things apart from the video mode itself isn't that major. At least not major enough to warrant a price that's almost 6 to 7 times that of the 5 Pro. Surely the iPhone X isn't just about the camera, but for a phone from a brand who always claim that it has the best camera ever, the iPhone X seems to be quite easy to challenge even by a mid-ranger such as the Redmi Note 5 Pro. I really am impressed by the Note 5 Pro. Xiaomi have truly done their magic with the camera this time around. Thanks for watching, see you again in the next one.